Have you ever considered that three completely different dreams, happening years apart to different people, could actually be telling one single interconnected story? Well, today we're diving deep into the story of the prophet Yusuf, because that's exactly what we find, a hidden parable woven through the dreams of a young boy, two prisoners, and a powerful king.
It's a pretty wild thought, right? That these visions aren't just random events in one man's life, but are more like carefully placed chapters in one unified message. And that's exactly the idea we're going to explore today. We're going to piece together a kind of spiritual map that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time.
So our journey is going to take us through what I'm calling a prophetic trilogy. First, we'll look at Yusuf's own dream. Then, we'll move to the two prisoners he meets in that jail cell. And finally, we'll get to the king of Egypt's dream. When you put them all together, they really do form this incredible map, charting a course through trial, knowledge, and ultimately divine will.
And it all kicks off with this one single seed from which everything else grows, the incredibly powerful and prophetic dream of a young Yusuf.
This is it. This is the vision that launches his entire unbelievable journey. You can just feel the significance of it, right? It's predicting a future where his own family, symbolized by the sun, moon, and stars, would one day bow to him. But this prophecy, well, it's also the very beginning of a profound spiritual test.
So what's really going on in this dream? If you look a little deeper, it's suggesting that true authority, that divine light, it doesn't come from worldly power. It comes from spiritual purity. The dream is basically saying that this light will bow to whoever reflects it most purely. And just like that, Yusuf's entire life becomes a test of whether he can maintain that pure reflection, no matter what: jealousy, betrayal, even imprisonment.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. Years have passed, and now we find Yusuf locked away in a prison cell. And it's right here, in this dark place, that his gift for interpretation is about to be put to a massive test. He meets two other prisoners, and each one has a dream that's going to seal their fate.
So you've got these two seemingly simple dreams. One guy is squeezing grapes to make wine. The other is carrying bread on his head and birds are flying down to eat it. But as Yusuf is about to reveal, these visions are about way more than just these two men's futures. They actually symbolize two fundamental, parallel spiritual paths.
Now, on the surface, this seems pretty straightforward, right? One gets saved, one gets executed. But this is where it gets really, really interesting. The key insight here is that these aren't just about two individual destinies. They represent two totally different but equally vital ways of being of service to the divine.
All right, let's decode these symbols. As you can see here, the wine server represents the path of knowledge. Think about it. Knowledge is something that's refined, kind of like wine, and then served to a higher purpose or master. The bread carrier, though, he symbolizes the path of sacrifice. In this case, the physical self, or the ego, what's called the nafsus, is given up so that the soul, the Rooh, which is represented by the birds, can be purified and rise up. See, it's not just about life and death, it's about two core principles, knowledge and sacrifice.
And this is where the whole story just blows wide open. These two paths, knowledge and sacrifice, they're seen as reflections of the two great spiritual lineages that come from Abraham. The path of knowledge is tied to his son Isaac, and the path of sacrifice, that's tied to his son Ishmael. So you see, they're not separate ideas. They're two essential halves of a single, unfolding divine narrative. And now the story shifts gears. We're moving from the personal trials in a prison cell to the fate of an entire nation. The third and final dream comes from the most powerful man in the land, the king of Egypt, and it holds the key to everything.
Can you imagine hearing that? It's a vision that just baffles all the king's wise men. It's a dream about consumption, about decay, a complete paradox where the weak are devouring the strong. The entire kingdom's future is hanging on what this dream means.
Of course, Yusuf is summoned from prison, and he gives the literal interpretation that saves Egypt. 7 years of great harvests will be followed by 7 years of devastating famine. This incredible foresight elevates him to a position of immense power. But the dream's deeper, symbolic meaning is what we're really here to unpack.
So let's just hit pause for a second and connect these dots. We've got Yusuf's personal prophecy about spiritual authority. We have the prisoner's dual paths of knowledge and sacrifice, and now we have the king's vision of a massive national crisis. Are these just three separate stories that happen to involve the same guy, or are they interconnected pieces of a much, much larger spiritual blueprint? Okay,
This is where we get to unfold the map. By looking at the symbolic language of that final dream, we can start to see how these three seemingly separate events just click together. They reveal these timeless cycles of faith, trial, and eventual return.
So when we decode the king's dream symbolically, it's clearly not just about food. The fat cows, they represent eras of spiritual abundance, those times in history when truth and clarity are widely known and preserved. The lean cows, then, represent the exact opposite, periods of spiritual famine, where that truth gets consumed by falsehood, what the source material calls tehut, and humanity just forgets. This isn't just an ancient story, it's describing a cycle that repeats over and over again.
What this reveals is this powerful pattern, which you could almost call a world cycle law. It goes something like this. First, divine knowledge is revealed and society flourishes, but over time, that knowledge starts to decay or gets forgotten. Then comes a period of hardship, a spiritual famine, that forces people to remember and search for that original truth all over again, and that kickstarts a whole new cycle of rebirth and remembrance.
Now, let's zoom all the way out. To the grandest scale possible. Because this entire parable of Yusuf, from his personal suffering all the way to this national cycle, it actually fits inside a massive cosmic timeline of humanity's journey back to its source.
You can almost visualize this journey as a three-part cosmic loop. It begins with loss and trial, which reflects humanity's fall from grace, a theme you see in Surah Al-As. Then comes a phase of abundance, but it's an abundance that's only possible because of sacrifice, a kind of redemption you see described in Surah Al-Kawthar. And finally, you get the return, the completion of the entire cycle, a theme found in Surah An-Nas. This is the moment humanity returns to its divine source, just like Yusuf's family finally returned and bowed to him, fulfilling that very first dream and bringing this whole story full circle.
And when you really think about it, all the trials in this story, Yusuf's suffering, the prisoner's fates, Egypt's famine, they're really just echoes of our own fundamental challenges as human beings. They reflect our own ignorance of where we truly come from and our tendency to get stuck in these cycles of pride and forgetfulness, generation after generation.
So, all of this leaves us with a final big question. What if this amazing story isn't just about a prophet who lived in ancient Egypt? What if it's actually a timeless map? A map that shows us the cycles of our own lives and the journey every single human soul takes, through darkness, through purification, and its eventual return to the light. Thanks for exploring this with us today.